Hello, welcome to episode 96 of the Datapack tutorial series, version 1.21. We're going to be running a command in unloaded chunks. And I think this is a pretty useful one. Let's see what I'm talking about. Right, I've got two commands prepared. We have execute if block 1,055 1,000,000 is sandstone. Well, I know it is because all of this is sandstone. And we'll say found. So let's run that command. And nothing happens. Well, that's because the chunk is unloaded. We can't check the chunk, so we get no result. But we have a different command, which is very long. This will make more sense as we go through, but if I run this command, we can see we're doing a few things. The first thing we're doing is we're loading and running. That's going to load the chunk. Now we're checking the chunk, and that's calling a macro, which is saying, is the chunk loaded? And we can see here that we're doing the check twice. That's because the first time failed. The chunk wasn't loaded. Then it checks again, and the chunk has loaded, and it runs the command, and now the command checks for the sandstone, and we found it. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing. Let's remember how to play the game. Escape, F5, F5, hello, let's get on and build it now. Okay, let's start off VS Code. Let's make some folders and files. My namespace, function, new folder. I'm just going to call it run. And in there we'll have a new file. So load and check. That's the function I'm going to be running. Copy that. Load and check is going to call check. Check is going to call a macro. And the macro will call run command. Okay, that's all we need. Right. Let's go to load and check, and let's write an example of how this will be called. So, function load and check, and we want to pass it some data. X, I'm going to choose some coordinates which are definitely unloaded. So let's do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. 100,000, that's got to be unloaded. Y equals 55, that's the floor level. Z, colon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's going to be unloaded. Which dimension are we checking in? Dimension. I'm going to be checking in the Minecraft overworld. And if those coordinates in that dimension are loaded, I'm going to run a command. Command. And my command is going to be to run a function. So I will have function, and I'm going to run the run command function. Let's pop that in there. Okay, let's bump. So that's an example of how we're going to be calling this function. Let's make this function, and we'll put in some say commands so we can see as it's stepping through what it's doing. We'll say load and run. You'll want to That was awful, wasn't it? You want to take these out, obviously, if it's a proper data pack. Right, first thing, we're going to load the chunk. Execute in dimension, run, force load, add, X, Z. Now, if it's loading the chunk is from the very bottom of the world to the very top, so it doesn't need a Y. It just says, I just need the X and Z. Okay, now, it doesn't wait for the chunk to load before it keeps going. So this next command, say, hi, it's going to say, hey, go and load the chunk. And then it's just going to run straight off and start running the next commands. It is not going to check. So this say hi, might not work at these coordinates because the chunk may not be loaded yet. It's like changing a light bulb with a friend. This is me saying to my friend, hey, turn the power off to the light switch, will you? I don't want to start running commands until I know he's turned the light switch off. Okay, first thing we're going to do though is store some data. Let's do data merge into storage into ID, we call it ID temp we usually use, don't we? Yeah. And in there we'll put it into data, and inside data we will merge in the X, and we'll get that from the X we passed. And I'm going to copy that. Copy. And I'm going to paste it in a few more times. Y, Z, dimension, command. Okay, so let's change these X. This will be Y, Y, Y. This will be Z, Z. This one will be the dimension. And this one will be the command. Okay, data merge story. Yeah, that looks all right. We'll find out later if it's not, obviously. So we've merged in our data, and now we'll go off to start the checking. Function, check. Save. Okay, function check. Let's say here, say, running macro. And all this is going to do is call the macro. Function, macro, but it's going to call it with some data. With storage, ID temp, data. The data that we've just put in. Okay, now let's go to the macro and we'll say checking. And if the chunk or the coordinates are not loaded, we want to check again. We want to keep checking until they're loaded. So we are going to execute in dimension unless loaded X, Y, Z, run. So if these coordinates are not loaded, we will leave this function. We will return. But before we return, we will run schedule. Oh, spelling. We will run schedule function check 5 ticks. Okay, why don't we just schedule ourselves? So load and check. Why does it go to check and then go to macro? Why not just call the macro directly? And it is because if we look in check, we're calling the macro with data. And you can't schedule a function and call it with data. So what we're doing is we're scheduling the check function, and the check function is calling the macro with the data. That's why we're doing it that way. However, if these coordinates are loaded, we're not going to check again. We're just going to continue down. So we can run our command now. So we'll execute in dimension, positioned at our coordinates, and we will run our command. Cool. That's now going to go off to run command. It's going to do whatever is inside that function. Doodly-doodly-doo. That was it doing it. And then it's going to come back and we're going to unload the function. So let's just copy this beginning bit, execute in dimension. And we will run force load remove X, Z. Save. Now in run command, we've got a say checking, yeah. In run command, we'll say running command. Let's just do a tell raw. So what we've been passed is we've been passed the coordinates of a block in a dimension. Okay, so we can use them to run a command. Maybe we could summon something there, we could teleport something from there back here. I'm just going to check for a block. Execute if block at those coordinates is Minecraft sandstone, then run tell raw all players, and we'll have a bit of text and we'll have a color found. That is okay, we can do it in the other order. We'll have text there, green, color. I usually like to do that the other way around, but never mind. Okay, let's give it a test. Let's go back. Let's do a reload. And let's execute if block 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 55, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is sandstone. Run, say hi. Nothing, because the chunk is not loaded. Okay, and I'm pretty close to 0, 0, so if I just change this to 10, 10, we get a hi, so we know that's working. Right, well, let's go and grab our example of how to run this. Let's copy that. Copy. Let's paste it in here and run it. Load and run. Ooh, look at that. I've not seen it take that long before. My computer must have been having a little spasm. Normally it checks twice and then runs the command. This time, look, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We had like 6 checks before the chunk loaded. That is why we need to have that little loop. So that, are you loaded yet? Are you loaded yet? And when it's loaded, then we can run the command. Let's try that again. That was quite long. Are we going to be any quicker this time? There we go, just 2 times that time. Okay, so you can see that you don't know how long it's going to take to load that chunk. So you cannot just go straight on and start, whoa, what happened to my head? And start running commands. You have to wait until the chunk is loaded. Once the chunk is loaded, as we're doing here, macro. So here, once the chunk is loaded, we can then continue down to the other things we want to do. And obviously we want to remove the chunk at the end. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a load of chunks randomly loaded all over your world as you run this command in different places. That's not going to be good for performance. Anyway, thank you very much to GalSergey for this one. I think this is really useful. There's a lot of times I've thought, oh, I want to target something, but it's not in loaded chunks. Now, if you've got the coordinates, you can. Cool. Anyway, enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.